Now, let's jump through time here a bit and get some more modern supposed examples of proofs of evolution. Because sometimes critics think, well, that was way back when, Darwinian evolution was in its infancy, and scientists obviously found way better proofs as time went along. Well, here's an example for naturalism that's persisted since 1952, and from the grandson of Charles Darwin's bulldog T.H. Huxley, Julian Huxley, who published an article titled Evolution's Copycats. His goal was to use an easily understood example of natural selection in action to explain its undoubted ability to cause creatures to adapt. Then he would extrapolate that idea to try and persuade his audience that all of life's incredible design could be explained naturalistically. Huxley's original article in Life magazine described how he believed samurai crabs supposedly evolved. He reasoned that the resemblance of these crabs' carapace to that of an angry Japanese warrior was far too specific and detailed to be accidental, and thus could only have been brought about by means of natural selection operating over centuries of time. And his argument was that basically when superstitious Japanese fishermen saw crabs with any likeness to a samurai's mask, they threw them back, benefiting crabs with a face, resulting in more and more crabs with a more clearly designed samurai mask over time. And eventually, this argument became quite popular when it was used by famous evolutionist Carl Sagan on his Cosmos TV series in the 1970s. Well, unfortunately for evolutionists, besides the fact that these samurai face shapes occur in nearly all members of this crab family, whether they live near Japan or not, and that there are examples of fossil Doripid-type crabs which predate the samurai warrior caste by thousands of years by their own evolutionary timeline, i.e. there were samurai crabs before there were samurai, the story really doesn't make much sense at all when the truth came out. And the absolute kill shot for this supposed evolutionary proof comes from evolution-believing marine biologist and crustacean expert Joel Martin, former associate curator of invertebrate zoology at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles. He showed the absolute absurdity of the entire story when he revealed, "The fishermen who make their living from the Sea of Japan do not eat any of these crabs. Whether they resemble a samurai, a human face, or merely a crab is a moot point. All are thrown back. For Dorip japonica reaches a maximum size of only 31 millimeters, or 1.2 inches, across the back, not at all worth the trouble of retrieving from the nets, let alone sorting through to see which ones resemble a face and which ones do not." So, in addition to the other facts of the matter, if the entire story was based on fishermen selecting these crabs, the samurai crab is obviously not proof of evolution. Now, a year later in 1953, you may have thought you'd hit the evolutionary evidential jackpot when you started seeing a diagram in textbooks showing some glass containers containing gases, electrodes, and a small organic trap at the bottom. Based on a recent experiment, this promoted the idea that scientists had basically found a way to make life in a test tube, simply because they'd synthesized a mixture of amino acids, the supposed building blocks of all life, in a laboratory, all with the takeaway message science had shown that life can happen through purely natural processes. Highly lauded for years as powerful proof in support of an evolutionary worldview, today we hear modern comments like the following from a Time magazine article. "This textbook picture of how life originated, so familiar to college students just a generation ago, is under serious attack. It was, says planetary scientist and White House fellow Christopher Chiba, a beautiful picture. Unfortunately, he adds, it's probably wrong." The article, written from a pro-evolution standpoint, goes on to describe the many reasons this experiment fails to live up to its initial claims and admits that the origin of life is still a mystery. Indeed, Stanley Miller himself, the main scientist involved in the original experiment that was basically promoted to lay people as having made life in a test tube, commented on it 38 years later in an article in Scientific American, where he admitted, "The problem of the origin of life has turned out to be much more difficult than I and most other people envisioned." So, unlike what many thought, this experiment comes nowhere near being proof of chemical evolution. Okay, well, let's move on to 1959, when a certain Dr. Kettlewell published an article in Scientific American summarizing his studies of the textbook story of England's famous peppered moss that became what some evolutionists considered the prize horse in the stable of evolutionary proofs for years thereafter. The story went like this. The particular moss normally come in light and dark forms. But when the pollution from the Industrial Revolution darkened the tree trunks, the lighter colored moss, which had been previously well camouflaged, now stood out against the dark background, making them more vulnerable to predation by birds. The result? Well, the proportion of dark moss increased over the light ones, and later on, when the pollution was cleaned up, the light moss became more dominant again. Survival of the fittest. Voila! Evolution has been observed. And this professed example of evolution in action has been taught to countless students as positive proof for the story of evolution, with Kettlewell himself saying that if Darwin had seen these results, he would have witnessed the consummation and confirmation of his life's work. But some rather recent and damning truths have come out surrounding his experiments, including the fact that Kettlewell glued moths to trees instead of deriving conclusions based on what he was observing naturally. Indeed, evolutionary biologist and vocal atheist Jerry Coyne commented on the downfall of this icon of evolution. Until now, however, the prize horse in our stable of examples has been the evolution of industrial melanism in the peppered moth. Coyne described his feelings, saying, "My own reaction resembles the dismay attending the discovery at the age of 6 that it was my father and not Santa who brought the presents on Christmas Eve." However, regardless of the fudge results Kettlewell produced, it doesn't make a bit of difference anyway. Eminent British evolutionist zoologist L. Harrison Matthews admitted the following when writing his introduction to Darwin's 1971 edition of Origin of Species. "The experiments beautifully demonstrate natural selection, or survival of the fittest, in action. But they do not show evolution in progress. For however the populations may alter in their content or light, intermediate, or dark forms, all the moths remain from beginning to end Biston Betularia." Indeed, moths of different colors evolving into moths of different colors isn't really that impressive at all. And once again, an iconic proof of evolution gets tossed out.